Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It depends on where you are. Our guest this afternoon, well, for us here in Miramar, Florida, it's really good evening, right? But our guest will tell you that it's good morning. What a wonderful world that we live in. That it depends on where the sun shines at us. That we say good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever. To greet the day and to greet others. But we'll be talking about a very important thing today. When we talk about organizations, I'm excited, right? I have a master's in organizational studies. My doctoral study actually focus on organizational leadership, and I love organizations. Organization has been a part of us everywhere we go in our communities. We will see a number of organizations, and in fact, the grocery store down the road may be considered an organization. Our schools, our churches, church groups, right? The neighborhood associations are organizations. 4-H club are organizations. So when you look at it, organizations are basically a group of people working together, right? Exist in order to achieve a common purpose. Organizations are very critical entities in our communities, in our society, and our guests will be talking a lot about organization as it relates to resilience, and why I want to create this sort of a backdrop, because she'll be looking at organization as Morgan would look at it, as an organism, machine, brain, culture. Morgan look at it basically as a political system, a psychic prison, but our guests will be looking at it more like a legal entity, a legal person, an organism, because she will speak about the resilience of organizations and individuals in organization. Our guest will come to you with a wealth of knowledge, and she's out of Australia. And I want to know. It's morning for her, and it's night for me. It's almost 7 o'clock here in Miramar, Florida, 7 p.m. ET. In a couple of hours, I will be in bed. But our guest in a couple of hours will be on the road. Will be where she will be doing what she wants to do throughout the course of the day while we sleep. I will let Jodi in to talk to me about all of this. Jodi, why are you awake now and out to be up and about while I should be in bed in another couple of hours? Talk to me about that. Where are you from, Jodi?
I'm in Victoria in Australia, which if people know Melbourne, I'm basically in regional Victoria, so about an hour north of Melbourne. So as you said, your evening over there, it's just about 9 o'clock in the morning here.
Wow. That's all right. I've had my morning already. It's your time. Okay. Tell me about you, though. Who is Jodi?
Okay. So in terms of the work that I do, which is mainly what we're going to talk about.
It'll be fine. Yeah.
Yep. I work on resilience. So that is resilience from an individual perspective. So people building their own resilience. But as you mentioned, also in terms of organisations. So that's leaders building their own resistance and also resilience in their team, and cultures in an organisation around how to build a culture where it's better for people so that they don't feel as stressed and they're more resilient to the stresses that come up as part of running an organisation.
Yeah. But you've been talking a lot about resilience, right? What does that mean, though?
It's such a good question. So resilience from an individual perspective to me is you're building up things in your life so that when stresses happen, because we all have them, you stay calm and in that more controlled, calm state as much as possible. Right. The reality is, though, we live in a world that has stresses, and there's very few people who can stay calm all the time. So the other side of it is that when there are things that are stressing you and you're feeling stressed, to pick it in yourself sooner rather than later, sort of as quickly as possible, and then bring yourself back to calm as quickly as possible. And there's sort of a third kind of side to it too, in that that sometimes we are really, really pressured and really not doing well. That I've heard it referred to as grit. Be able to kind of get yourself back, push yourself through it and get yourself back up on your feet, and for it to not be long-term something that's kind of defeats you. So, yeah.
Interesting. This is Canute Exploration. I am Dr. Canute White, reaching out to you from Merrimar, talking to Jodi in Australia, right? Morning for her. Jodi, I'd like to find out, how do you consciously and systematically build that sort of resilience into organizational culture, especially for enduring cultural concept?
Yep. It's an interesting process. The first thing with organizations is to work out what's actually going on. Because and the way it works, sort of the larger the organization, the trickier that is. So the first step is to always actually work out what's going on. So work out what are the things that stress your people? What are the challenges that they're facing? What are they looking for out of their employment? Why do they actually come to work every day? So to get the first step is always get a really, really accurate picture of what's going on. And there's various ways of doing that. And organizations do that to various degrees of effectiveness.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yep. And then the second step is, once they have that accurate picture, to actually systematically go through and create support structures or systems or mentoring, or there's all sorts of different ways of doing it, to actually highlight the strengths and to address those weaknesses and address those challenges. So it's a systematic. First step is work out what's going on, actually do stuff to address it, and then down the track to actually reassess and go, okay, where are we at? What do we need to do differently?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, as you talk, Jodi, I recall people talk about absenteeism, right? We know that, constantly being away from work, absent from work. But there's also this concept on the flip side of presentism. You're at work, but say something about presentism a little, as it relates to resilience.
Yep. So presentism is where somebody is physically at work, and like if we talk in the work from home sort of circumstances, they're actually sort of on the clock working, but they're at home, but they are not as productive and as engaged as they could be, or as the organisation would like them to be. So generally, when there's a lot of presentism, the productivity drops, and people's engagement and sort of really being involved and innovative and helping others and all that sort of stuff drops as well.
So I want you guys to know that you can be at work and not be present, so to speak, as Jodi has explained, right? So that's presentism. You absentism, you're not there. Presentism, you're there physically, but you're really not there sort of mentally, sort of being productive, right? So that's critical. You need to be productive. Jodi, we don't have to accept stress as a way of life. There is a better option. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So this is almost like my personal mission. To me, what I see out there in the world is there is so much stress, and we live so much in a state of stress that we almost don't realize that we are stressed. It's become almost the norm, and really it's not a great thing for us long term. It's not a great thing health wise. It's not a great thing mental health wise, so physical and mental health. It causes challenges in things like how we think clearly under pressure. It causes problems usually with relationships, that sort of stuff. So it's not a great way to live our lives, but it's become such a norm of the way we live our lives now that it's almost accepted as the norm, and people almost don't even realize when they're stressed. So part of what I'm doing is raising awareness that actually this isn't kind of a normal way of living, or it shouldn't be, and there are things that you can do to kind of help yourself. So if we're living constantly in this stressed fight or flight, that's a survival mechanism that if you go back to the biological origins of it, it's a life or death situation. Body reacts to give you the best chance of surviving. That's what the stress response is, which is fantastic in a life or death situation. But if we're living our everyday life in that way, it's really not a fantastic thing for our health, our relationships, our general well-being, long-term and short-term. So my mission is raising awareness around that there's other options. There's things that you can do to not be in that state all the time.
But Jodi, you will appreciate, as you know, an organizational consultant, as I am, you know, the organization actually creates stress for us, for workers, for individuals. So you will go to work and it's inevitable that you become stressed, especially if the organization is not family oriented. What do you think?
There is always going to be stresses. So there's always going to be, so if you take in terms of like a workplace, there may be something goes wrong on a production line, so everything has to stop, and there's a big cost of it stopping, and everybody has to stop and fix it. It could be we've gone through a huge period of it with COVID, where there's been major market changes and major delivery changes, and the way we work for most organisations really changed. You're never going to really take out all of those stresses. But the organisation can do things to support people. So that's to support them individually, but also to set up things in the organisation that mean people are going to respond to the stresses better. Yeah. So a really good example in organisations is things, there's quite a few of them, but things like having systems and processes so that when something happens, people can work within basically predefined parameters, predefined processes, so they don't have to be, they can know where their authority and accountability stands, know how to proceed in a calmer way, not have to seek help and permission as much, know when they have to seek. Do you know what I mean? It's like there's things that you can do, and there's so many of them. Systems is just one of them. There's things that you can do so that your people feel safer, in control, and they feel like they're empowered to be able to address those stresses as they come up.
Right, and I agree with you. That's very critical, Jodi. Jodi, work-related resilience. What does that really mean?
Well, it goes back. So do you mean not from an individual perspective? You mean from the organisational perspective?
No.
No? Okay. Basically, as I said before, with resilience, it's staying calm as much as possible. But when you are feeling stressed, spot it in yourself and bringing yourself back to calm as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. If you take that into a work-related situation, it's we are individuals working in organisations. So the first side is to build up your own resilience and the individual resilience of all of the teams within the organisation. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Yeah, you are, because this whole thing, you have answered correctly, because I guess this whole thing about resilience, looking at organization from an organism perspective, as we said about Morgan, it will speak to us even as a resilient individual. right? So just consider organization going through a number of challenges as well. I guess, yeah. So we got that. Very interesting. Organization, even as a legal person, you know, it can it can be looked at. You basically sue the organization and not necessarily the owner of the organization. Wow, you know. But how do you differentiate the larger systemic issue versus the individual ability to self care, sort of, and provide self maintenance?
Yep. You actually really need both. So, for an organization to really work well, you need organization, you need individuals who have their own resilience in check, so that's they're able to look after themselves personally, and organizations can do things to help people with that, so providing things like coaching, things like training programs, that sort of stuff. From an organizational point of view, it's setting up that environment, as we sort of said before, setting up that environment so that people are more able to stay
Yeah,
in that calm state, more know where they stand, know that they are safe, and not feel like things like how do I explain? So things like, if people feel like they can't speak up and voice their opinion, they
yeah,
feel that they don't have security in their job, they feel that there's no greater purpose in the role that they're doing. All of those things are things that are going to work against the organizational resilience and the individuals within that
yeah,
working together as a team towards the greater organization. So it's a funny thing. So
yeah,
to say it more succinctly, the individuals have to build their own resilience, and the organisation has to support them in that,
yeah.
but also provide the structure that helps create that. So through things like, as I said, psychological safety systems, a greater purpose,
All
that
right.
sort of.
But do you think we really? I mean, I must stop saying we. Do you think that employees really care about the organization? Most employees, is there
It's
a loyalty that exists really?
Yep, it's a really interesting point, because employees who are engaged and do actually care and see a greater purpose in the work that they do
Mhm.
are generally better employees. They stay longer, they're happier, they generally work harder, they're more productive, they have more ideas of ways to do things better. So I think you're right. The reality is a lot of staff don't care about their organisation, but it's human nature
Yeah,
to want to be part of a bigger purpose. It's human nature to want to do a good job. It's
yeah,
almost as if things get in the way of that. So yes, you do have employees who they don't care about their employer, or they're not engaged. But for most people,
yeah.
there's a reason that that's developed.
Mhm.
Most people don't start out in a job that way. They actually really
Yeah,
want to do a good job. You spend so many hours of the day working,
mhm,
you want to actually be somewhere where you're valued, you feel what you're doing is important, you feel what the organisation is doing is important. So,
yeah.
yes,
You're right.
yeah.
You're right about that. Definitely. What are some of the major behaviors or workplace norms that you readily identified as being problematic?
Yeah, so I've gone through a few of them already. I'll go through some more, and then really focus on one in particular.
Okay.
Um, Psychological safety is sort of the one I'll focus on in particular. A lot of people have heard this at the moment, and it's a buzzword at the moment. People talk about psychological safety,
Yeah.
but when you don't have psychological safety, it causes major issues in the workplace. So what psychological safety is that people feel safe to voice their opinion, even if it is different to other people who they work with. Um, they feel safe to try new things, to innovate, to develop their skills and maybe not be great at something for a little while. It's that thing of, I can make mistakes, I can try new things, I can say things, and I'm still in a safe environment. So the opposite of that is that people don't feel safe, which means they normally stick to themselves more. If they have ideas, they keep them to themselves more. Sometimes they can end up being quite resentful that their voice isn't heard, that it's not valued, that basically they're why talk up because I'm overridden anyway. So that's one of the big ones that's a big issue. I mean, and the other ones that I've kind of mentioned is things like, I briefly mentioned purpose, having a greater purpose of the organisation and their role in it. If that's absent, you can lose people a little bit. Things like an imbalance between the amount of effort and the reward. And reward can be money and pay, but it can also be, acknowledgement and career progression and all that sort of stuff. As I said, I mentioned systems before. People not feeling supported, cared for, valued is a huge one. Issues in terms of workplace dynamics. So things like politics, conflict, bullying, that sort of stuff. There's quite a few more, but that's sort of to give you, there's certain
nepotism perhaps as well.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a serious one. Interesting.
It's like, so favoritism, whether that's because of, as you said, nepotism or for whatever reasons, like used to be described a lot of the time as the boys' club. It can. Yeah.
It's a problem. Yeah. You're listening to Kenyute's Exploration. I'm Dr. Kenyute White, and I'm sitting here with Jodi out of Australia. I'm in Merrimore, reaching out to you from Merrimore. We're talking about organizational resilience, and it's important for us to also, Jodi, look at the individual level, and what does it mean to build your own resilience. You perhaps touch on that a little, but if you could expand on it, because in the organization, we as individuals need to build that sort of resilience in order to, again, feel comfortable spending days in the organization, hours in the organization.
Yep. So I look at individual resilience on 3 levels. So the first level is when you are feeling stressed, to recognize that in yourself and to bring yourself back to calm. And basically, the stress response has a lot of physiological sides to it. There's a lot of things that happen physiologically. So there's certain things, once you recognize your stress, that you can do that work basically to overcome that physiological response and to bring you back to calm. So that's the first level. And I can go through some of those if you like. They're usually quite quick and easy to learn, and some of them are quite fun and novel.
That's fine. Yeah.
Yep. Well, okay. So with any of these reset things, as I said, they go to the physiologically, and no one thing works for everybody. So the most common one that works for more people than any others is probably the deep belly breathing, where you slow your breathing down, you breathe from the bottom of your lungs, and it's called belly breathing because if you're breathing right, your belly goes in and out.
Yeah.
And basically, you slow down that breathing pattern, and that physiologically tells your body, I'm not in life or death, brings you back to calm. But there's some other quite interesting.
Share another one. I mean, I'm good.
You're good?
Share another one. You can share another one if you want to, Jodi. I'm good.
Okay.
Share another one. Is there another one you want to share?
My personal favorite one's this. So basically, you firmly hold your arms, cross your arms, and firmly hold your upper arms, and you rub firmly.
Okay. Yeah, I feel calm. Yeah, I feel like I'm
It actually has, it's strange, it actually has a physiological response. It's
Right.
probably the one that works the most on me out of all of them. And I almost instantaneously feel myself relaxing.
Oh yeah, it happens, and I felt that way as well. Great. So this is something, Jody, that employees can do. Sitting at the desk, being stressed out, being at the computer, they can just calmly relax. Like, yeah, I love that.
I mean, if you're in a public place, that mightn't be a great option. So
Yeah.
the one that I teach people if they're surrounded by other people is that one of the physiological responses when you're stressed is that your mouth dries up. So what you can do is stop yourself from swallowing saliva, let it build up and swish it around in your mouth. And again, goes to the physiological response and tells your body the opposite. I'm not in life or death situation, and it calms you down. And that's probably the most useful one for a lot of people because you can do it when you're surrounded by other people. Most of the other tricks like this, you're obvious that you're kind of doing something. That's probably the only one where you're doing it, and people, unless you have to talk, people have got no idea that you're actually doing it.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I will use it. I love it. I love it. Hey, go ahead, Jody. You go ahead.
I was going to say, so the 3 levels. So that's the first level. The second level of building your own resilience is there's certain lifestyle and mindset things that you can do that help you to be more resilient to the stresses in your life. So if you go to the mindset things like how you view failures, setbacks, problems, how you view yourself has a huge difference. Do you look at the world as it's working against you, or it's actually everything is making me better? Like there's a lot of mindset things that can make an enormous.
That sounds schizophrenic. Yeah.
And in terms of lifestyle, there's lots of them. So the 3 basics are your diet, sleep, and exercise. But there's a lot of others. So things like work-life balance, finding things that you love, relationships in your life, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So that's the second level. And they're things that have an enormous difference in how you deal with stresses that come up. The third level, people, especially people who stress is a reoccurring, regular issue in their life. And I'm very open in saying I was one of these people. It's why this ends up being my area of speciality, because it was a major challenge for me. So people who have this as a reoccurring thing, there's generally underlying subconscious things that can make an enormous difference to how they deal with stress in their life. So things like people feeling they must be perfect, or people feeling that they're not good enough, that sort of stuff. And they're generally, as I said, subconscious things that people aren't aware of. So in coaching, when I work with people one-on-one, I dig deep and find these out as much as we can. And then once you're aware of it, then you can do things to kind of overcome it.
Yeah, because the important thing for organizational leaders is to ensure that the well-being of employees, are up there, perhaps not 100%, but as best as possible, to ensure productivity. But there's this thing I'd like to talk to you about as it relates to the mental well-being, as we touch on it, because there is a researcher called Keyes, who talked about flow and flourishing in the workplace, and the idea of getting to that level of flourish, according to Keyes. But organizations are struggling to manage mental well-being of their staff. Why is that so?
So what organizations generally do to help well-being of staff, they kind of fit into 2 categories. There's the responsive and the reactive and the preventative kind of basically. So reactive is things like a lot of, especially larger organizations. Are you familiar with EAP programs, employee assistance programs?
Oh yeah, okay.
Yep. So larger organizations have things that are what I call more reactive. So somebody is feeling stressed. They have so EAP is where there's a counsellor available that people can talk to help them work through issues, but it's reactive. So what that means is it's not actually addressing the cause. So that's the first thing. So then ideally organizations to manage well-being, yes, that reactive stuff is very, very, very important, but you want to be preventative rather than reactive to create things that are actually going to help well-being. So what I see a lot of organizations doing is they'll do things that either only work for a smaller proportion of their staff, or they're almost like a surface level. So we saw a lot of this in COVID.
Yeah.
So during COVID, employers did things like care packages for staff. So that they sent out, people working from home, and they'd send out a little package of, I don't know, some chocolates and maybe a stuffed toy and yeah. So that stuff's great, and it actually helps people feel valued and cared for. But is it actually addressing the root cause of what's causing the stress? Probably not. So the other sort of things that organizations do is things like organize meditation and yoga sessions, and they're fantastic. Big fan of meditation and yoga, but it's a small percentage of people who are, and it's a small percentage of people who it works for. So the preventative stuff that I find organizations generally do is either doesn't apply to a large cross-section of staff, or it really is kind of surface level and doesn't get to the root of what's causing the stress. So organizations generally struggle with managing wellbeing because they're not getting to the heart of what the actual problem is, which goes back to one of your earlier questions around how do organizations manage a resilient culture. The first step is find out what's actually going on and then respond accordingly. So it's a long-winded way of answering the question, but the way that organizations have generally been managing it isn't getting to that root of the problem. They need to find out what the root of the issue is and really address that directly. So the way they do that and the way they can manage wellbeing better going forward is really get to the root, find out exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
What are the challenges? What are causing the stresses? And actually really work through and address them. And sometimes that requires an outside kind of help or consultant to help with that process. Sometimes people can do it internally. It sort of depends on the dynamics and the issues that we're talking about.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because organization, you talk about the AIP, right? What happened is that they tend to outsource that a lot, because you don't want people to think that, okay, I'm crazy now, so I'm going to be seeing the counselor. I'm going into a program. So organization try to outsource that so that the other employees do not see. And that speaks to a point that you have made about the psychological safety thing. Okay, if I say things, if I'm exposed to the other employees, then this is going to be a problem. So I'm going to be hush with my mental challenge. Tell me though, is it that this coffee break thing, right? This coffee break, a lot of organizations might not have used coffee break, but coffee break can be a sort of a proactive way of dealing with mental challenges. Would you say?
So you mean just giving people time out to take something? Well,
take a break. And providing the coffee, providing let me tell you this. There's a space that I used to work. The organization provide pastries, coffee. Every 45 minutes, you see a tray coming out. So you understand that will be there. You'll get a 15 minutes break.
It's interesting. It goes to a couple of the principles. So one, it goes to the people feeling cared for and valued because the organisation's providing that. But the fact of a permission of being able to take some time out, that's when we go to the first level things that you can do to when you're feeling stressed. One of those is just basically take some time out. So go for a walk for 10 minutes or whatever. So the fact that there's permission to be able to walk away from your workstation and take some time out, yes, that does help with stress. It's part of the puzzle. Definitely not the whole puzzle, but yeah.
Yeah, interesting though. You're listening to Canute Exploration. I am Dr. Canute White, sitting in with Jodi. As I as I keep saying, out of Australia, the morning starts for her. She'll be up and going, while in a couple of hours I will be in bed. But that's cool. That's all right, Jodi. Jodi, building resilient culture. Is it the same across all industries, organizational industries?
Yes and no. So there are pretty much nearly every industry has some degree of stress in it, and there's some things that are consistent across different industries. So things like work demands and deadlines and that sort of stuff are most industries, not all. But what you find is that different industries have certain things that are particular to those industries. So, for example, one of the big one that people are really aware of at the moment are your healthcare workers. Okay. So your healthcare workers are dealing with quite often life or death situations. So they're dealing with very large implications of them doing something wrong or them making a mistake. So they're quite often trying to juggle multiple demands and things that may be out of their control, and budgets, working within budgets and staffing and that sort of stuff. So if you take the stresses of that sort of industry and compare that to, just say, what's another one? Just say your average accountant. Yeah. So your average accountant has things like probably quite demanding customers, has things like legal compliance kind of regulations in what they do. Mm-hmm. They have things like, if they make a mistake financially, a lot of the time a big implication for their customers. So that's quite different to your healthcare worker, but they're both quite stressful in very different ways. So yeah, it does depend on the industry, but nearly every industry has something. So if you think through, think through sort of, I don't know, your teachers, your retail, dealing with sometimes customers who are not the nicest to you for various reasons. There's going to be different stresses for different organizations, definitely, but there are also undercurrents and commonalities as well.
Well, that's interesting though. I love that. I like the way how you put it across, and it's interesting that happens across different organizations, different industries. I consider the firefighters as well, the first responders. You talk about the health, but also the firefighters, right? But I'd like to look at that one essential characteristic of leaders who are looking to create this sort of a resilient culture that you have been talking about.
Yep. I would say consistently the most important characteristic for leaders in setting up this really positive, resilient culture is their own emotional intelligence. Okay. So emotional intelligence, it's got two sides to it. People normally only think of one side of it. Right. The first side of emotional intelligence, which is not as well known, is the person knowing themselves, knowing what their triggers are, what makes them excel, what makes them maybe not react as rationally. It's a real know yourself and be in control and self-manage around yourself. Now, that's the side, as I said, the side of emotional intelligence that's not talked about that much. But
Right.
the reality is leaders set the tone. So if
Yeah.
they're in a really good state in themselves, they're setting the tone for everybody else.
Right.
The other side of emotional intelligence is being able to really connect with, empathize, and have that emotional, social connection with the people around you, which for any good leader is extremely important. And the larger the organisation gets, the harder that is
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah.
do. But yeah.
Yeah, Jodi, we are, as we try to wrap up, but we are going into a new workplace, a new organizational culture, right? After this pandemic, we don't know when this will end. However, organizations trying to reopen now, to reestablish, right, and therefore this new organizational culture had started. What would be your advice to organizational leaders as they go back to work, back into this new organizational system? What would be your advice as it relates to resilience? Because it's challenging coming out of this.
Yep. I would basically say have really authentic, honest connection with your staff. Now, as I said before, larger the organisation, the harder that gets. But you want to actually find out what's going on with your staff. So if you make assumptions around what's the best setup, what's going to work for people, you're generally going to assume the wrong things. So you need to really find out what's going on with your staff. So what are the challenges they're facing? What are their concerns? Where are they at in terms of their state at the moment? What are the other things that might be going on in their life that are a problem? What are the roadblocks to them feeling like they can actually really do their job well? You can't assume those things. You need to really find out. And you can find out, you can do things like engagement surveys. Be a little bit careful with engagement surveys because they can be answered according to how they're written, if that makes sense. So you can mould answers by how you word the questions, and also people can get concerned around them being anonymous and that sort of stuff. But there's other ways. So things like one-on-one conversations and really connecting with your staff across the organisation to find out exactly what's going on.
Right.
That has to be the absolute key. As I said earlier on, I feel like I'm sort of going over the same thing, but it's the fundamentals. You've got to really find out where people are at, what they need, what are their challenges, what's working well, and then respond to that accordingly, so that, as I said, most people want to do a good job. You want to empower them to be in a good state and do a good job, which is better for them. It's also better for the organisation. So.
Yeah. Before I go into your social media and some of the things that you do, so that the people can talk with you, I want to find out your opinion as it relates to organizations are now dying because of the pandemic. Will there be some organizations that actually die, some industries that will actually close down? What's going on?
It's a huge question.
Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a huge question. I think if we look back at this in terms of historically, not specifically the pandemic, there are
Right.
different market pressures and different things that change all the time. And there are things that some organisations don't survive. So if you take back to, like, you remember your Kodaks of the world, or your Blockbuster videos, or your Encyclopedia Britannica. Those organisations in their day were huge, but they didn't necessarily change with the times. So this is, in that way, is not a new phenomenon. Things change and organisations have to change so that they survive. To answer your question, yeah, probably there will be ones that don't survive.
Yeah.
As to what they are,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's. I mean, there's some obvious industries that have been really seriously affected by this, like your travel, your retail, your
Yeah.
hospitality, and a lot of other industries that are almost indirectly being very affected by it, that aren't the obvious ones.
Yeah.
So it probably is, yes, there are probably organisations and industries that are going to either have to really change
Yeah.
or may not survive. But that, as I said, is not something new. That's why I kind of went back to the
Yeah.
history. And Kodak in its day was huge.
Yeah. I know, right? A lot of engineering have to take place. Hey, Jodi, what do you do in terms of your business, right? Now we want to people to engage you, right? Eventually after this podcast, your website is scrolling across. However, I'd like you to tell us what that website is, because there are persons not watching, but they're listening on their favorite podcast platform.
Okay, so my website is www.jodiwoelkerling.com. So I'm sure in the show notes you'll get the spelling of my name. So it's
Right.
just jodiwoelkerling.com. In there's sort of information around what are the different services that I do. There's lots of ways that people can actually reach out to me and have a chat to me, or organise organised to basically connect. There's also, I'll mention in there too, around organisational leaders. I have a book that's just been released. It was only released last week, which is designed for organisational leaders, or your higher up sort of managers, around what are some of the big cultural issues that repeatedly come up. So there's an option there. They can find out more about that there as well.
Well, Jody, I'm going to stop you there, because I won't let you go without telling me about that book. Say something about that book. Yeah.
So it's pretty much an awareness piece around what are some of the biggest cultural challenges that I see repeatedly, and what are sort of what are the impacts, and what's the long-term cost of having those cultural challenges, and there's case studies in there, and all of basically how this sort of shows up.
What's the name of the book? What's the name of the book?
World-class leadership.
Okay. Where do we get that book?
Go onto my website. There's a book page on my website, and that gives you all the information, and you can register from there.
Cool. One of the things I'd like you to do, to spell that name, that last name, as it relates to in the website, because persons listening might not, have the right website.
I'll spell my first name too, actually.
Oh, you're right, please.
I actually do have Jodi can be spelled about 5 different ways.
Right.
So Jodi is just Jodi, and then my surname Woelkerling.
That's
so just website's just jodiwoelkerling.com.
Right. I want people to understand that. People are listening and not seeing from YouTube, and it's running across the screen on YouTube. But those persons listening to Can Youth Exploration on their favorite podcast platform would hear the spelling, right? Jodi, you also have a Facebook account, Facebook page. Tell us about that.
Yep. So if you just search Jodi Woelkerling Enterprises on Facebook, that will come up. In terms, so there's posts and all that sort of stuff. I don't majorly focus on Facebook. Probably my main social media presence is LinkedIn. But yes, you can definitely reach out to me, or see. I post fairly regularly across Facebook and LinkedIn, so you can see sort of my content across those. So yeah.
That's cool. But LinkedIn, you want, well, people can also find your LinkedIn.
Yeah. I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if people want to find me on LinkedIn, they can look up Jodi Woelkerling, or as you've got across the screen, Resilient Culture Consultant with dashes in between.
Right.
Yep.
Go ahead, Jodi.
Yeah, sorry. And basically, they can see sort of my profile from there and things that I've posted. And as I said, reach out and message me through there.
And the final one here, your YouTube channel.
That's a relatively new kind of thing. It's probably only been the last couple of months that I've been really focusing on that. So any of my videos that I release, and there's usually at least one a week, they go on there so they can see some of my content on there.
Okay, okay, Jodi. So I'm hoping that people will engage your business and to get some some information from you. You have a wealth of knowledge, and I note that I would recommend people to talk with you because I've learned some things from you, right? Despite the fact that I'm also in organizational leadership, behavioral aspect of things, but I learned from you, a number of things, and that is very very important, Jodi. So I would ask people to engage Jodi, to find her website and to read her book. Yeah, I mean, it's out, and Amazon. It's on Amazon as well.
No,
It's
I've
not.
done it sort of, yeah, basically the website's the way to go.
Okay, so the website is the way to go. So I will ensure that they. Hey, Jody, it's so nice talking to you. I am excited when we talk about organizations. Every time I have a podcast guest talking to me about organizations, I am excited about it because you're talking my language, right? And we can talk a lot about it, right? So, Jody, it's nice talking to you, and have a good morning where you're at, and I will have a good night. Right.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting.
You're welcome, Jody. You're welcome. All right. So that was Jody out of Australia, and I want you to engage her on her website to talk to her. There's some way you can get in touch to have a talk with her, and also have her come and talk with your organization, right? I guess that she would be able to have, based on the fact that we're having the pandemic challenge now, she will have virtual discussion with your organization wherever in the world you are. Trust me, she will. Right. So get in touch with Jody. You see her website running across the screen, and you heard on your favorite podcast platform. She's also on LinkedIn, and she's also on YouTube. From time to time. Look, we still have a pandemic. I'm encouraging you to take the vaccine. I'm not telling you, right? I had done my two Pfizer, and we need to do the right thing. Whatever you think the right thing is, right? And remember also, wash your hands, wear your mask, and keep your distance. This was Canute Exploration, your topic in the podcast. I am Dr. Canute White, and you never know what we will talk about next.